Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 4th of September 2024, just after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Charles Malet. I have with me in the studio Mike Robinson. Good afternoon, Mike.
Afternoon.
And we're joined by Vanessa Beeley via video link from Damascus. We're going to start the programme with Vanessa, who's going to tell us about the situation involving Sarah Wilkinson, the British journalist recently arrested for online posts. So, Vanessa, over to you.
Thank you, Charles, and good afternoon to everybody. So we're going to first of all look at the increasing totalitarianism from the UK state, particularly under the government of Keir Starmer, who, as Jonathan Crook writes for Consortium News, is now terrorising Palestine supporters and those that question the UK's complicity with Israel's genocide in Gaza. So what I'm going to look at is an interview that Sarah Wilkinson, an activist and journalist on Palestine particularly, someone that doesn't necessarily put out political views, but is literally reporting on the hourly slaughter of Palestinians inside Gaza itself. She did a recent interview detailing her arrest under Section 12 of the Counter-Terrorism Act in the UK, where she describes 12 officers coming into her house. Not all of them are anti-terrorist squads, some of them wearing balaclavas at before 7:30 in the morning. So I'm going to just play a few clips from an interview she did with Crispin Flintoff, and this is the first clip.
I've gone to find them and they're not there. Especially the money. But the passport is a difficult one because I am now required to hand in my passport in 7 days' time. But they've taken my passport and they've not included it in the list. So in a way, it's entrapment. When I go to hand in my passport and I can't, then I'm in breach of bail and they'll arrest me because they'll say that I've hidden my passport or... But actually, they've taken it, but they've denied that they've taken it. So now how do I hand in a passport that's been taken but not listed? I'm completely trapped, and there's nothing I can do. And not being allowed to travel, and yet I have to sign in. That's 4 bus journeys, which I can't reach the place I have to sign into in a day. So I would be stranded. And when I said, well, I can't get home, if I sign in on this particular day, there isn't a bus to get me back. He said, well, bring a tent. Well, I'm 61. And he's asking me now into November, this will go through winter. Because I can't get home, I have to take a tent.
I mean, I do recommend that people watch the full video, which of course will be in the show notes. It's quite horrifying. Sarah then goes on to describe some of the other acts committed of destruction, really, and looting committed by the police officers. So if we just play the second clip.
But they also took about £200 worth of cash out of my wallet. And then they scattered my mother's ashes all over the attic. I had a horrendous day yesterday, literally scraping my mother's ashes out of old picture frames. They were everywhere. I've never had to do anything so horrendous as that before. And the urn obviously is meant to be 3/4 full. The urn is now half full. So my mother's ashes are still scattered in places that I can't retrieve them. In parts of the attic, I just can't retrieve them.
I mean, this is a complete campaign of terrorism, as Sarah describes it herself. And she also describes not only the looting, effectively the theft of money and other items, and then not listing them before the police left her house. But also here she talks about how the police were dressed But she does also say at a later point in the video that it was very similar to her to a Shin Bet operation or a Mossad operation in the way that the police were both treating her and questioning her, particularly about Palestinians, that she said they deliberately appeared to dehumanize and to be very racist towards. So let's just watch the final clip.
I live in a very small rural area. I'm not allowed to travel. That's another thing. No travel documents, no train tickets, no bus tickets, nothing that enables travel. So I live in a remote place with one shop. I can't even do online shopping, or I can't even get food that my village doesn't sell. So I'm now basically, this is almost a house arrest without it being a house arrest. So yeah, the conditions of the looting, I'm going to call it looting because they have stolen stuff and not listed it. So I can never claim it back. The money has just been pocketed by one of them. My son was treated badly. He was sort of thrown out of the house while they did this. And then I was held without any medication, no food, because without my meds, I can't eat. So therefore, if I was going to be there for a week, which is very possible, I couldn't eat. And I thought, well, if I'm here for 7 days, I'm not going to survive this. So yeah, it's like terrorism against civilians, and the balaclavas, hiding their identity. I think that felt like this was a terrorist raid. But not only that, when I was in the police van, they didn't drive to the police station. They went a different way. And there was a point during this journey, I thought, they're not police. I've actually been abducted here. I've been kidnapped. They aren't police. They're not driving.
Quite extraordinary. And in another section, she describes the fact that she has Crohn's disease. Her medical card was hidden inside the mattress. And they also bugged the house, they discovered afterwards, because there was plaster missing and putty on the wall. They then removed the bugs. So quite an extraordinary experience, and not something that any of us, of course, would want to go through. And that is part of the freezing effect on dissent against the government. At the same time, of course, the Palestine Action co-founder faces charges under the Terrorism Act, under Section 12 also, as does, of course, Richard Medhurst, we've talked about previously. If we just look at this, there are a number of Palestine Action that, of course, have been carrying out direct action against the arms companies like Elbit that have been supplying weapons to Israel to enable the genocide. And there were a number of the Palestine Action activists arrested also. So, we appear to be really going into what is effectively a crackdown on dissent against government policy. I'm sorry. Yes, I just wanted to quickly play this. Sorry, I know I'm a little bit over time now. But I think this video brings an important message.
Let us be clear. Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. The US is complicit in genocide. These are not political statements. They are statements that are made from knowledge and experience. But even if there were legitimate doubts about Israel's genocide, there is no doubt that Israel is committing atrocity crimes of the most barbaric kind. Israel must be stopped. Israel must be stopped now. We are disgusted by Western leaders, especially in the USA, Germany and the UK. They have demonstrated not only that they don't care one bit about genocide prevention and human rights, but also that they are willing to allow an ally to commit atrocity crimes while they offer material and diplomatic support. It is reprehensible, and the individuals involved in this gaslighting campaign should be deeply ashamed. They should also be put on trial. Humanity has a choice. Either we decide that our children can all be killed whenever a superior force alleges that terrorists are among us, or we decide that under no circumstances will we allow these superior forces to lay waste to our world any longer. We must each choose and act accordingly. The watershed moment is now.
I think that's a very strong message, and I'll end there.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Obviously, a terrible ordeal for Sarah Wilkinson to go through, and the wider point being how vulnerable people in similar positions now are. And what I'm going to do now is just provide a bit of context to effectively the sort of police procedure and the background to it. So as Vanessa says, the arrest was made under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act 2000, and that's support of a prescribed organisation. So the person commits the offence if they invite support for a prescribed organisation, and that is not restricted to money. Obviously, a definition that is open to quite considerable interpretation. There was an amendment made in 2019 with the Counter-Terrorism and Border Security Act, and that is written up here, which is that you also commit an offence if you express an opinion or belief that is supportive of the prescribed organisation, and in doing so, whether you're reckless as to whether a person to whom the expression is directed will be encouraged to support a prescribed organisation. Now, we really are into the area of thought crime here, because it looks very much like if you're in any way criticising the government narrative or the actions of the Israeli state, that is putting you in a de facto position of supporting Hamas as a prescribed organisation. That's the way that this has been inverted, which of course is completely beside the specific point of having prescribed organisations. Now, the Home Office guidance has been changed this year. You might remember a report on the rather ludicrous prescription of a completely ill-defined organisation called Terrorgram. But the point is that in writing up prescribed organisations, you are able to capture people with a very wide net. So what are such things? Well, the Home Secretary may prescribe if they believe that the organisation is concerned in terrorism, and critically that it is proportionate to do so. So what determines whether or not prescription is proportionate? Well, there are a number of criteria that may be satisfied. It's not a suggestion that they all need to be, but it is worth pointing out with regard to Hamas particularly that it says the specific threat that it poses to the UK. Well, at the moment, that's not defined, or at least not substantiated. The specific threat that it poses to British nationals overseas, the extent of the organisation's presence in the UK, and the need to support other members of the international community. Well, which other members, I think, is a question that must be asked at that point. Also, the other thing that I've mentioned many times before is that Hamas was only prescribed by the Home Secretary in this country in November 2021. So in effect, what Sarah Wilkinson has been put through would not have been possible had this happened 3 years ago. I think that's a point worth bearing in mind. Now we'll look at the use of effectively anti-terror powers, and these are from the statistics produced just last week, within which they state that there were 212 arrests for terrorist-related activity. This is only finishing 31st of March this year, so it'll be very interesting to see by what factor that's gone up in the succeeding time. That's an overall rise of 8%. But I think the significant detail here is that 68%, in other words, only 32% resulted in a charge. Of course, they don't go on to say how many of those charges resulted in a conviction, or indeed how many actually got to court. Now, the other point to draw out here, which again we've talked about a lot before, is concerning magistrates. The warrant for the entry to the property and the seizure of all of Sarah Wilkinson's devices was granted by a magistrate. How do you become a magistrate? Well, you do not need formal qualifications or legal training to become a magistrate. You'll get full training for the role, and a legal advisor in court will help you with questions about the law. Okay, so how full is that training? In your first year, training to be a magistrate will take 3 to 5 days. I mean, were the situation not so dire, this would almost be laughable. But sadly, this is the system which is very, very intentionally put in place in order that it may be subverted, in order that this outcome may specifically be engineered by police putting pressure on a magistrate in order to obtain such a warrant. They will roll over due to insufficient training, insufficient understanding of the situation, and a complete inability to look at things in a reasonable, proportional, and necessary manner. The other thing to look at, of course, is the bail. Now, there are 3 reasons for granting pre-charge bail by police, and there is no doubt at all that the bail conditions imposed upon Sarah Wilkinson are oppressive in the extreme. this seems to be the clause which best fits the situation now, in that then it's no longer necessary to detain her in order to secure or preserve evidence, because either that has been done by speaking to her or from gathering the objects of the search, which was conducted in such a vindictive manner in her house. But they're not in a position to charge, so the suspect must be released, and they have absolutely done so with malice at the front of their minds, stating that further investigation, that she's gone on bail where there is a need for further investigation of any matter for which they were detained. Well, it's very hard to argue what exactly that might be. So I'll just round off this segment by asking the question, who are the terrorists? This is from the Terrorism Act 2000, and Section 1 starts by defining it, where the threat of action, the use or threat of action, is designed to intimidate the public or a section of the public, and the use or threat is made for the purposes of advancing a political, religious, or ideological cause. Well, that is ever more increasingly matching the behaviour of the UK state with regard to these people who are putting themselves in such a place as to be critical of the regime. So that sort of wraps up this segment. No doubt we'll talk about this a lot more in Extra. Now we're going to go to Ukraine, where Zelensky seems to be under a certain amount of pressure, and Mike's going to deal with that for us.
Well, indeed. But before we get to Ukraine itself, we've had Ukraine in Britain. So this is the Ukraine Defence Minister visiting, and of course our Defence Minister, well, no tongues, I hope. But anyway, this visit, they say, comes during a milestone moment. So they signed a bunch of paperwork. This is a milestone moment in international support for Ukraine, with 8 countries from across the world having now joined the UK to provide more than £1 billion to the International Fund for Ukraine, in a significant show of unity from Ukraine's allies. So that should make us all feel excellent. It comes after the Prime Minister, they say, announced the IFU's largest ever support package at the NATO summit in July, with £300 million contract to supply 152mm artillery shells. That contract's now been signed as of yesterday. So there we go. That's all going on. But in the meantime, things in Ukraine itself seem to be falling apart somewhat. So a whole bunch of resignations. This is Dmytro Kuleba, who's was the foreign minister. He resigned today. This is what is being described as the highest profile casualty so far in this a whole bunch of resignations, as we'll see in a second. This is happening at the time of a reshuffle. So apparently the people that are leaving are going to leave today, and the new people are going to be announced tomorrow. Well, various letters have been doing the rounds now. It's very quaint, perhaps, that people are resigning in handwritten letters, because that doesn't seem to happen these days. Now, this is being pushed around social media as being Kuleba's resignation, but in fact it isn't. This was the Deputy Prime Minister for reintegration of the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. She sent this particular letter, but if we look at the list so far, we've got Dmytro Kuleba, we've got the Minister of Justice, we've got the Minister for Strategic Industries, we've got the Minister for Environmental Protection and Natural Resources, the Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic Integration, and the Deputy Prime Minister that we just mentioned for reintegration of uncontrolled territories, and also the Deputy Head of Zelensky's office have all resigned so far, and I'm sure that list is going to continue. Massive changes happening within the Ukrainian government, and many people now suggesting that this is the rats leaving the sinking ship. And I think everybody at the UK column will probably agree with that sentiment. In the meantime, over the border in Poland, the Polish Foreign Minister Radek Sikorski has been speaking to the Financial Times. In this article, Poland has a duty to shoot down Russian missiles over Ukraine, says Minister. So we're not going to worry about the border there. If there are any Russian missiles in Ukrainian airspace across the border, Poland is certainly aiming to get permission to go ahead and shoot those down in what would be a pretty significant escalation, no doubt. Then, in the meantime, in Romania, they have decided that or at least the Romanian government has decided that they are going to approve a donation of a Patriot missile system to Ukraine. This is currently subject to ratification through the Romanian parliament, and that's happening today, apparently. So we shall see what happens there. But in the meantime, other great news from the UK itself, because we have made a digital trade agreement. This is fantastic. So they've been pushing out some information about what we need to know. So let's just have a look at what they're saying here. The agreement opens the door to wider shifts in digital trading systems, which is more important than ever for Ukraine at a time when its physical systems have been impacted by war. It will allow consumers and businesses in both nations to benefit from open and inclusive digital markets. What does that mean?
I couldn't quite tell you, I don't think.
No, so the digital content is not subject to customs duties, cheaper and quicker trade through promoting digital trading systems, including electronic contracts and digital authentication, online consumer protection and intellectual property protection is what they're talking about. And they go on to say that the agreement is part of a series of digital initiatives by the UK government. These include the UK-Ukraine Tech Bridge, promoting collaboration and investment across both nations' tech sectors. And they have a quote here from Jonathan Reynolds, who's the Secretary of State for Business and Trade, saying, "Greater digitalization of the economy is an important step in supporting Ukraine's economy and their fight for independence. This government regime, perhaps a better word, will continue to lead the way in our unwavering support for Ukraine and its people." Well, just to give you an impression of what this means, if we think about what Brian was presenting on Monday with the UK Defence Journal coverage of how much money has been pumped into Ukraine by the British government so far, the value of the value of exports of digitally delivered services to Ukraine is £151 million. So that's value for money. We pump billions and billions and billions of pounds that could be better spent in this country. We pump that into the war in Ukraine. We see the deaths and destruction as a result, and the return on that is £151 million in digital services. Good job, British government / regime. And then finally, on sort of defence and war, I just wanted to leave on a little bit of humour because, well, the HMS Queen Elizabeth has sailed again, having had its refit for the propeller prop shaft issues that it was suffering. It is now heading back to sea for a busy period of equipment trials and training. So, Charles, my question for you is, how long will it be before it has to be towed back into port, do you think?
Well, I wouldn't like to make a guess for choosing too large a number, but perhaps we should have a sweepstake for the UK column audience.
Yeah, okay, in the chat box, please. We'll talk about it a bit more in extra. Okay, yeah. Let's leave that topic there for today. And let's say if you like what the UK column does and you would like to support us, the place to go is support.ukcolumn.org. Memberships are £5 a month. Please do join us if you possibly can. You'll get access to the forums and to the extra content that we produce for members. And that support is very much needed. But please do also share material that you find on the various platforms. The place to go to find it in the first place is ukcolumn.org and ukcolumnextracts.co.uk. We are censored everywhere just about, so we do need you to be the algorithm for us. Please do that if you can. And also, if you can support us by picking something up at the UK Column shop, that is fantastic as well. And we want to say once again, if you haven't got a copy or send a copy to a friend of Agenda 21, Your Life in Their Hands, please do that. Now, yesterday I was speaking to David Siegel and we were launching, or at least announcing the launching of a second climate science masterclass. Now, I'm going to say the feedback on that has been mixed because quite a lot of people found some of the content quite challenging, and indeed it is. But nonetheless, I'm just going to say for the first climate science masterclass, all the people, including myself, that took part in it, got a lot from it. So in this particular interview, we're talking about global warming, or sorry, about the term is completely
climate change.
No, don't
No?
worry. Well,
Right.
yes, we are talking about climate change.
Okay.
But anyway, watch it. It is challenging and worth a bit of thought. And the 11th of September is the beginning of the next climate science masterclass. So the details are in that video. Now, tomorrow, 1 p.m.
Yeah, going out tomorrow, an interview I've recorded with Claire Wills Harrison, a lawyer by trade, and a fascinating insight into how she's seen the legal system effectively collapse around her with corruption at every turn. Now, Claire significantly is going to be at the live event in October, and I would very much encourage you to listen to her interview specifically because she talks about tax resistance as well as a lot of challenges that she came across during the sort of COVID period, particularly around informed consent. And then we go to Bristol on the 19th of October. So if you haven't got your ticket yet, then please do take a look at that. They are selling well. Also on timings, we've had a few inquiries as to what time the day would finish. We've got doors open at 9:15. We have the venue until 8 o'clock in the evening. So I think it would be prudent to book travel for after 8 o'clock in the evening.
On Sunday, we'll be hosting a symposium on behalf of International Centre for 9/11 Justice, entitled "Aviation Impossibilities: Deconstructing the Official Story of the 9/11 Hijackings and Air Defence Failures." This, of course, is for the anniversary of 9/11 itself. Join us for that. It begins at 6 p.m. It'll be in the usual live stream places, and we'll be hosting that on their behalf.
And then coming up this weekend, Friday and Saturday, the Attack on Food and Farmers Symposium, hosted by Children's Health Defence at chd.tv. A lot of very knowledgeable and good speakers. You can see actually in the lower rank, Joel Salatin, who was on a UK column interview just a couple of weeks ago. So if you're wanting to look at a way of controlling your own food supply, then I would encourage you to tune into that.
And on Saturday, the 20th of September, Brian and I will be speaking at the Heritage Party conference. That is in Reading, and details on the heritageparty.org website.
And then finally, the Died Suddenly exhibition, which is going to be shown in London in November, being organised by Jake Fern to explore the unexplained deaths, the excess deaths that have been happening over the past few years. So if you want to get in touch with Jake about that, please do so at jakehfern@yahoo.co.uk. Now, we'll move on to the topic of extremism, which is never far from the news, or at least how extremism is defined. And over the last couple of weeks, I've referred to David Clues, who is running Unity News Network. And of course, he was in effect pilloried and victimised by the mainstream media for the way in which he treated, in a news reporting capacity, the violent disorder after the Southport killings. Now, I spoke to David, and there's going to be an interview published straight to the UK Column website later on this week. So I've just got a clip of him speaking to me, and my question to him was, where does he see this going? What is the end state as far as the government is concerned?
In an ideal world, they would shut down social media entirely, and you would just be stuck at home watching the BBC or ITV or Sky, and you'd be watching the approved titles. They simply do not want people having alternative sources of information, because if they do, people can then expose their scams and they can expose their lies. And we all have a track record over COVID. We have a track record of the war in Ukraine. We've got a track record over the conflict in Israel and Gaza. And they clearly don't like us because we provide a nuanced and balanced view. It's like they say they are conspiracy theorists. They're brainwashed. They say we're the ones that actually have a proper look at the situation and try and say, look, in every conflict, there's one side, there's another side, and there's other people, and this is some of the and they hate that.
So David Clues there really talking about the suppression of speech, the suppression of any kind of dissenting voice, which of course is now being labelled as extremist. And so therefore it's worth pointing out that on Monday it would have been, Yvette Cooper in the House of Commons talking about extremism. She says in a debate about violent disorder, "I've been concerned for a long time that not enough is being done to counter extremism, including both Islamist extremism and far-right extremism, as there has been no proper strategy in place since 2015. And she goes on to say that she's ordered a rapid review of extremism to ensure that we have the strongest possible response to the poisonous ideologies that corrode community cohesion and fray the fabric of our democracy. Now, of course, course, what she really means by that is anyone that disagrees with either her or the government. So I'll just point out that the Free Speech Union, they probably have to be a bit careful about the language they use here, but they say they've threatened to take the Home Secretary to court over her plan to revive the perception-based version of the non-crime hate incident. Basically, Yvette Cooper wants what are called non-crime hate incidents, which are extraordinarily hard to define, but effectively do not represent a criminal offence. She wants them to be recorded. Interesting also that the graphic used shows a plastic test, which I think is the sort that was used for the COVID so-called pandemic. So we will watch to see which direction this goes in. Of course, we have all the enormous sort of wealth of material on where Lord Wolney had been going with this for the previous government. And Mike's just going to round off this segment with a bit more about UK column content.
Well, perhaps the Free Speech Union should read this article because it's just been posted on the UK column website. Britain had the First Amendment first. This is Philip Ridley, and it's a fantastic article which goes through all the legal and constitutional background to where Britain's right to freedom of speech comes from, and in fact where the First Amendment in the United States derived from. So this is a very important article, and I do recommend everybody reads it, and most importantly shares it, please. Now, yesterday the regime announced that certain export licenses for arms to Israel were going to be suspended. This is what David Lammy had to say.
But facing a conflict such as this, it is this government's legal duty to review export licenses. It is with regret that I inform the House today the assessment I have received leaves me unable to conclude anything other than that for certain UK arms exports to Israel, there does exist a clear risk that they might be used to commit or facilitate a serious violation of international humanitarian law. And he is therefore today announcing the suspension of around 30 from a total of approximately 350 to Israel as required under the Export Controls Act.
So this looks to me like nonsense, really, because at least virtue signalling and nothing else, because one of the significant exclusions from this 30 is anything to do with the F-35. And of course, the F-35 is one of the main weapons that's being used to demolish Gaza at the moment. So that is a pretty significant omission. They are saying that if they attempted to restrict exports of F-35 parts and so on, that this would have a much broader effect than just the Gaza conflict itself. My question then is, has this got anything to do with Ukraine, actually? So if we bring this on screen, this has been a narrative that's been running for a long time, and clearly the Ukrainians complaining bitterly that they don't have the weapons and that Britain and the rest of the world needs to send more weapons. But the question is, do we have the weapons to send? And increasingly, I suspect the answer is no. So I think this is from late 2023. And then this is from just a day or two ago, UK and Europe running out of weapons to help Taiwan if China invades. So again, this article talking about the fact that the weapons have all gone to Ukraine. So Vanessa, very briefly, I was just wondering what your thoughts are on this, because it seems to me that probably if all they want to do is virtue signal, they'll choose export licenses that apply to weapons that they don't have to export anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, Britain has been providing intelligence operations and surveillance to Israel for a long time, but particularly since October the 7th. And yeah, I agree with you, Mike, this is total virtue signaling. And notice that there is no transparency over these contracts. So the remaining 320, I presume we're not being given information as to what that includes.
That's absolutely right. Now let's move to Gaza, Vanessa, and we'll just start off with this tweet here, because this is Annalise Dodds, who's the Minister for International Development, and tweeting out about this great effort to vaccinate the whole of Gazan society for polio. And I just wanted to zoom in on one graphic there. This is an oral vaccine. So undoubtedly you've got something to say about this.
Yes, well, I'll start off with the Journal of Infectious Diseases, with prolonged replication, attenuated poliovirus's use in the oral polio vaccine can mutate into what is called vaccine-derived poliovirus. So I'll just start with that. And as I said, that's from the Journal of Infectious Diseases. The WHO is effectively the organization which has identified one case of paralysis in a child in Gaza and is now asking for a humanitarian pause from Israel to enable the entry of 1 million oral polio virus vaccines. And that campaign will be made up of two stages, the first vaccine and the second. This is Ahmed Al-Rahman, sorry, the name escaped me for a second, who's the child that has been claimed has contracted polio virus. But remember that that virus could easily be already present from the previous oral vaccine campaigns in Gaza, bearing in mind the appalling conditions, immunosuppressant conditions that these people are living in, poor sanitation, trauma, lack of food, lack of water, lack of anything, pretty much. And of course, that's a deliberate campaign by Israel. And this was back in November 2023. Of course, there have been other very similar statements. Former Israel general says severe epidemics, in Gaza would help Israel win the war. So is this a vaccine campaign or is this biowarfare by the Zionists against Palestinians? And of course, when we look at the deliberate destruction of the majority of the water and sewage system since October the 7th, deadly disease ripping through Gaza after the destruction of the water and sewage systems. And there's a very long and detailed report from Oxfam, Water War Crimes, how Israel has weaponized water in its military campaign in Gaza. And of course, we shouldn't forget that Israel has been deliberately targeting children, more than 17,000. We know these numbers are very low estimates. Children have been killed in some of the cruelest and most savage ways possible. So why now a so-called humanitarian pause? And here, of course, is Bill Gates, one of the originators of the oral polio vaccine and responsible for much else, as we know, with Israel's Netanyahu. And then this is from the Children's Health Defense, which, of course, Robert Kennedy Jr. was formerly with. I think, Mike, you told me that he had now left. But of course, the irony is that he is a supporter, or rather a denier, of Israel's genocide against Palestinians. But in this article, they talk about the polio vaccination still causing polio after all these years. So what do they actually say? So the oral polio vaccine is in use around the world and constitutes the so-called workhorse of global polio eradication efforts due to its low cost and ease of administration. The OPV contains live but weakened polio viruses that match up to wild polio viruses. Vaccine researchers have long known that these OPV-derived viruses can themselves cause polio, particularly when they get loose in the environment in settings with poor sanitation. And as I've mentioned, in Gaza, you can't get much poorer. Iffy hygiene. The vaccine viruses can easily find their way into the water sources or into the sewage and onto contaminated hands or food, where they can then launch a self-perpetuating chain of transmission. Researchers concede that an OPV virus can very rapidly regain its strength if it starts spreading on its own, acquiring mutations that make it basically indistinguishable from the wild-type virus. In other words, there is no meaningful difference between a wild and OPV-derived poliovirus in terms of virulence and in terms of how the virus spreads. And I remind people again that Israel has no humanitarian reflex towards Palestinians whatsoever. And from the Substack of journalist Sam Hosseini, he points out the fact that some have argued that Israel's goal is to ensure that there is not a polio outbreak in Gaza, since that might threaten Israel itself. It's an example of enlightened self-interest. However, this reasoning might be undermined, I believe it is, by the fact that Israel has been giving its soldiers a polio vaccine, and they have been giving them the IPV vaccine, not the oral one given to Palestinians. This would indicate that they would be immune to it, and Israel may effectively come off unscathed from a polio outbreak among the Palestinians. Also, IPV deals with all three types of polio. In 2022, Israel had cases of polio, and the reports IPA and OPV were used. Now, it's interesting to note that, for example, in countries equally with very poor sanitation conditions like the Congo, like Yemen during the war, there are cases of vaccine-derived polio outbreaks. And while the WHO was carrying out an oral polio vaccine campaign in Pakistan back in 2013, 2012, there were mercenaries coming into Syria from Pakistan that were fighting alongside al-Qaeda in Syria to topple the Syrian government. And there was effectively an outbreak of polio at that point, vaccine-derived polio in Syria. I remember these reports, as probably you do, Mike. And in fact, the Syrian government accused the WHO of importing polio back into Syria because in Syria it had been eradicated in 1999. And then basically, even among the Gazans themselves, there is a huge distrust about Israel's motives in allowing the vaccines right now. And this, there's a couple of clips from Gaza journalist Bisan Alda, who's been reporting on the genocide since October the 7th, and herself is suffering with one of the multiple skin diseases that are now rampant in Gaza because of the conditions. So let's play the first video.
This guy, anonymous, I don't know who is this guy, sent me this email. And Allah yarda alayh, he made me ask a lot of questions. I mean, do really the occupation who killed 17,000 children, who cut them into pieces, killed them in brutal ways in front of their parents, or maybe let them bleed under rubble for hours before passing away, cares about saving the lives of children in Gaza? The same occupation criminals, genocidal army, who are now putting all these children in tents in horrific conditions, health conditions, let them die, literally die because of starvation, die because of the skin infections and because of the fever, because of everything. And then now they care about the vaccine, the polio virus vaccine. Why?
Very good questions. And in fact, one of the points that I thought about afterwards as well is, of course, the vaccine centers that she will now describe will lead to the influx of crowds of some of the youngest generation in Gaza. Of course, 50% of the population is under the age of 18. So is this Israel basically targeting the next generation of Palestinians, as they have been doing since October the 7th, with the majority of their targets having been children? So let's just see how she talks about this.
Is that there is no such thing as a truce or a humanitarian truce. It's only in the hospitals, the field hospitals, or the medical clinics or points, field points, that will give the vaccine for the children. So a kid or a parent, okay, can be killed while going to have the vaccine or getting back from having the vaccine to their tents or their displacement camp.
And actually, sadly, this is exactly what happened yesterday. The Al-Fakhura school, which was one of the vaccine administration centers, was bombed, leading to multiple casualties. So it appears that, the fears about the introduction of biowarfare and also the gathering together of targets for Israel to be able to slaughter them en masse.
Thanks very much, Vanessa. And it does seem an extraordinary intervention until one considers who might benefit or who stands to benefit the most from it. But certainly it's not isolated, as exactly you point out. So I just want to draw people's attention, first of all, to what's happened in Ukraine, where the parallels are very significant. And we see that 650,000 doses of specifically polio vaccine to Ukraine in April last year. This is UNICEF. And then on a broader context, we've got the World Health Organization in 2023 again, describing they're on the move for health, defending Ukraine against vaccine-preventable diseases. And of course, when the balloon goes up, the pharmaceutical industry pounces, and the World Health Organization therefore saying the war has made it harder for people to get vaccinated in Ukraine. Obstacles include the displacement of populations, destruction of healthcare infrastructure, and disruption of logistical routes for delivering medical products. This profound impact raises concerns about the potential for outbreaks of polio, measles, and other diseases, and has prompted the need for innovative solutions to sustain access to immunisation. So first of all, they're completely ignoring whether or not people wanted to get vaccinated for anything in the first place until the conflict came along. And also the other thing being ignored is that all of this would be much easier if there was simply a cessation of hostilities, which seems to be a strategy that's never pursued by any of the parties involved because there's too much at stake. The other thing to look at is from this year, which is a report, well, widely reported actually, that the Pentagon apparently was spreading what's called misinformation or disinformation, effectively an anti-vaccine propaganda campaign to rubbish the Sinovac vaccine of China. But and the way this is described by the Scientific American is that they say that now we know when health authorities were desperately trying to tamp down these fears, the Pentagon was running its own conspiracy operation to discredit vaccines just so it could score points against China. The revelation is a worst-case scenario story for the global public health community, says Caulfield, because it demonstrates that anti-vax misinformation was being spread by the government and it reinforces people's distrust in institutions. Well, that's one way of interpreting it. I think I might say that in actual fact, this is probably more related to corporate greed, and in actual fact that by suggesting that the Sinovac was problematic, was not only pushing people towards vaccines made by different manufacturers, but also reinforcing the idea that anybody that considers any anti-vaccine sentiment of any sort is a lunatic and should be treated as an extremist. But also we want to look at the sort of the known harms, and just a reminder, therefore, that Gulf War syndrome clearly, an ongoing thing being reported here by the Department of Veterans Affairs in America. But again, the absolute opportunism expressed by the pharmaceutical industry, even when no substantial threat can be evidenced. Of course, the pressure on the system to vaccinate completely unwitting members of the armed forces. And as Vanessa's just been talking about, the vaccine-derived polio from Syria, of course, an enormous body of evidence suggests that polio is caused by DDT in the first place, and that it's actually the vaccine that does the harm on top of that. But then the last thing to look at is the manufacturer and who stands to gain. Again, this has already been alluded to, but the manufacturer in this instance is Biopharma, which is actually an Indonesian state-owned business. But of course, they are in strategic partnership with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So that's how that circle is squared. I dare say this, as a modus operandi, will absolutely persist, and we'll be seeing it rolled out across all zones of conflict under the banner of an emergency, which requires medical intervention, as we've seen a lot over the last few years. Now, that takes us back to the United Kingdom, and specifically digital identity, Mike.
Yes, you'll be glad to know, everybody will be glad to know that Companies House has decided that it will start implementing the government's One Login system. And if you remember, One Login is making sure that everybody can, they describe it as the new, straightforward, secure way to access government digital services. It allows users to access a range of central government services using just one account, one username and one password. That means that none of us will be will need to provide information multiple times. So convenience is the method of the day here. Now, so far, the areas that you can already use one login include if you want to apply for your HM Armed Forces Veterans Card, if you want to get a driving license, if you want to become a registered social worker in England, if you want to be taking part in the Apprenticeship Assessment Service, or to check if a health condition affects your driving, or to claim compensation if you were a victim of violent crime, or early years child development in training, find an apprenticeship in the UK, find and apply for a grant, find a UK market conformity assessment body, and so on, and also manage apprenticeships. The list goes on. But anyway, Companies House getting involved in this. So the other thing to note here is that they mention that basically they will require this login, this one login, once they've gone through a private beta process and then a public beta process. And the reason for that is that under the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act that you can see on screen at the moment, anyone setting up, running, owning or controlling a company in the UK will need to verify their identity to prove who they are and who they claim to be. And so, as I say, once this public beta is complete, every user signing in to the Find and Update Company Information Service will need to use one login. But if we remember back to the previous Tory regime here, and they were highlighting the issue of digital ID, and they were trying to bat off a bunch of claims that people were making on the internet and so on. And so they created a frequently asked questions. And the claim here that they were trying to bat off was that using one login would be mandatory. And they said at the time, no, having a UK government one login account will not be mandatory for UK citizens. Offline and face-to-face routes will be available for individuals who do not want to use the online service. So I've asked Companies House whether, in fact, that will be the case, whether they will be providing alternative access, and I'm still waiting to hear back from them. They are going to give me that information, and I'll report back in due course. But in the meantime, of course, other companies or other organisations within the government continuing to fail at providing this alternative access. So this is HMRC customer service at all-time low as phone line wait gets longer. That was from February this year. And I just want to mention the possibility that one login is being rolled out, but perhaps you can go to the post office as an alternative. This is what they were suggesting. I haven't seen anything actually officially announced that this is a service available already, but I'm going to suggest that in fact digital ID is going to be a requirement for using the one login system, and that is going to be a requirement for accessing government services increasingly.
Absolutely. By hook or by crook, it does seem exactly that's the way it's going. And I'm just going to sort of effectively extend this theme by referring to a government document about enabling the use of digital identities. And we hear a lot about the enabling and the government effectively suggesting that they are going to be doing this themselves, which is why there's a big red arrow saying we're working to help people securely prove who they are without having to rely on physical documents. So again, hanging everything on the apparent desire for convenience. And this falls under DCIT, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. And they seem to be suggesting to everybody that it's the most frightful bore to have to repeatedly present physical documents, and that the government is not making digital identities mandatory. So there's very much a theme. History suggests that when somebody says something like that, they absolutely mean it will be mandatory. And probably the most effective mechanism is by what might be termed a lock-out, so that if you haven't done such a thing, you simply can't use the services that other people would be able to. So now we're going to look into how this gets certified. It's all very well the government saying they're doing it, but who actually underpins this? Who's providing the background to it? And this was updated on Monday, the list of digital identity and attribute services who are now certified against what's called the UK Digital Identity and Attributes Trust Framework. Now, in order to make this work, or at least to be able to judge it, because of course artificial intelligence plays its part in this, they have gone to ADVAI or ADVAI, I'm not entirely sure how you pronounce it, but it's the Advanced Evaluation of AI-Powered Identity Verification Systems, and they claim that AI is core to online identity verification. As the complexity of verification tools have advanced, so too have the methods to deceive them. And again, they state that sort of passively, but actually it's such an enormous consideration in this, in that with every advance, so too is there a counter advance by effectively the cyber criminal capability. Nonetheless, the new kid on the block, as it were, is SumSub. They've just been certified in the UK as a trusted identity verification services provider. So that's from August the 23rd. And going back to who exactly it is that is deciding whether or not an identity is valid, they talk about having a framework which aims to create a trusted environment where digital identities can be confidently used by individuals and organizations, thus enhancing security, privacy, and efficiency in digital transactions such as financial operations or online government services, exactly like Mike's been talking about. So it seems pertinent to wonder who is behind such an organisation. Who are the people that are running these organisations? What is their pedigree? Well, SumSub appears to be the brainchild of somebody called Jacob Sever, or at least is he called Jacob Sever? This is his LinkedIn profile, upon which is listed no other experience at all. This is the only thing he has shown there. And Companies House shows that in actual fact it's called Sum and Substance, and that his name now seems to be Yakov Severikin. Now, I've highlighted the fact that not only is he Israeli, but he doesn't live in the United Kingdom. He's from Cyprus, and he is the sole director of a company with a £31 million turnover, which strikes me as an unlikely situation. Among the persons of significant control, they are all called Severikin, or at least at some point or another. Now, it seems somewhat ironic when we're dealing with digital identity. There seem to be at least 4 spellings of the surname, but they appear to be a family business, 2 twin brothers and another, perhaps cousin, perhaps a brother. But this is who we are going to be submitting control of our lives to, and companies like this, which need to have no tie to the United Kingdom beyond registration with Companies House. Also, of course, they're offering secure face authentication for the banking industry. And again, we have the idea that it's so safe and it's so convenient. So they talk about biometric checks for digital banking, but what we really have to be bearing in mind here is facial recognition, because of course this capability, whilst it might be used to apparently protect bank accounts, has many other applications. And just to demonstrate that, they say that they have 99% pass rate. I would say that actually if 1% of people can't use this technology, that's a fail, but nonetheless they seem to be advertising it as a good thing. I've highlighted that they say they work with various nationalities. That's a little bit mincing their words there, seemingly not all nationalities, but also as if to say that, you know, you can't trick facial recognition. They say it works with glasses, beards, and makeup. And also now, more significantly, they say that they're now the first verification provider to achieve global identity certification. So they've gone a step up from just dealing with UK identity, but earlier, they made a reference to finance, and I just wanted to go back to that because they've now partnered with Finastra, the financial platform technology provider, sort of payments solution provider with software to support that. And the reason that's significant is that on the Finastra website, published recently in May of this year, there's the question asked, where will UK payments be in the next 10 years? And it is an article worth looking at, but what I've picked out is this chunk from a paragraph here, which says currently the top 3 priorities for UK financial services firms are open banking, the new payments architecture under review by HM Treasury, and the central bank digital currency, CBDC. The review suggests that it will take at least 5 years and a total cost of between 10 billion and 20 billion to deliver this payments roadmap. So it seems little coincidence that a company partnered with Finastra specifically with the intent of enabling a central bank digital currency would be chosen as a trusted provider of an identity verification service by the UK government. Where exactly this is going to go is hard to determine as yet, but it does not look like it's going in a very good direction. So I'll close off that segment there. And I think,
well, just before we move on, I just wanted to get a comment from you, Vanessa, because once again, we have right at the core of, technology and is really company, or at least backed by Israelis. I wonder where they got their seed capital from. I'll take a wild stab in the dark and say Unit 8200, but I don't know that off the top of my head. But I just wondered if you had any comments on that.
Well, I mean, whether it's Unit 8200 or another one of the intelligence agencies, we know that, virtually all the population in Israel has gone through or is part of the military services. So, I mean, it's a pretty good guess, Mike, and that's certainly the first thing that sort of jumped to my mind.
Yes. Okay. Well, look, we will end with this little bit of irony. So this is a screenshot from a part of the Daily Mail website yesterday. And I'm just going to highlight, first of all, the article at the top, because the headline on this is, I'm 21, and by the way, I'm reading this verbatim. I'm 21 and I clean hoarder homes for a living. This is why I do it. And the moment I found a £20,000 item, I found under a mouldy carpet. Now, that may not have made any sense to anybody. That's because the sentence doesn't make, or the headline doesn't make any sense. So that was the top of that little block of articles on the front page of the Mail. And then as we scroll down the bottom, we find an article here saying, the next time you spell check, these unfortunate typos show the importance of proofreading. And I just thought the irony in that was spectacular by the Daily Mail. Perhaps they should take their own advice and do a little bit of a better job at proofreading their own material. And we will leave you to think about that for today.
Absolutely, Mike. Thanks very much indeed for joining me. Thank you all for joining us. Vanessa, thank you too. Now, don't forget the interview with Claire Wilshausen going out at 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. And of course, please get your tickets for the October event if you have not already done so. But otherwise, we'll look forward to seeing you on Friday. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.